Good morning, YouTube warbles. On a lot here with First Dog on the Moon.
Existential angst.
Hello, patriots, and goodbye. This was First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. For the moment, I'm still Walkley Award-winning political cartoonist for The Guardian Australia, First Dog on the Moon, but who knows for how long. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. It is true, dear listener, everyone's time comes, and now it is ours. Well, not yours, hopefully, or mine either, if I can help it. But the guide to modern living will soon be the guide to not living anymore, the guide perhaps to eternal rest. And I'm not even pretending to make a funny joke. This isn't a conceit or novelty construct as we've been doing this past 5 years. 5 years of this stuff? Really? Anyway, this is it. The Guide to Modern Living has been cancelled. Or has it? Actually, nobody from the ABC has formally told me it's over. In fact, I read it in The Guardian, and nobody takes that rubbish seriously at all. So, Michelle, if you're listening, what am I saying? Of course you're listening. Give us a tinkle. This is On the Moon. Not now, Darren, I'm busy. Sorry. Shows getting cancelled is just the cold, hard reality of life working at a public broadcaster in Malcolm Turnbull's Australia. Now, I'm not suggesting there was pressure applied from the government to silence me. I'm not sure they're clever enough, although I would understand it. Maybe it was the time I suggested the immigration minister liked to put kittens in a blender to make a delicious smoothie. Apparently, it's easy to hurt Peter Dutton's feelings. Or maybe it was that time I said the treasurer likes punching babies. None of these things are true, of course. It's just satire. We made the whole thing up, except the kittens in the blender. The sad thing is, the Guide to Modern Living has a long and proud history. I remember listening to it as a kiddie. I'm not the first host, although perhaps I'll be the last.
Welcome to James Dibble's Guide to Modern Living.
Remember that? The first ever Guide to Modern Living was broadcast in 1958, hosted by James Dibble. It dealt with the important issues of the day. Should Aboriginal people have the vote? Of course not. And 5 different delicious recipes for gelatin and asbestos. It was the sort of show my Uncle Robert and Auntie Jean would have liked listening to up there in Warwick amongst the mangoes and the cane toads. They don't listen to it anymore, of course. There's too much profanity. But then the whole thing fell out of favour in the 80s. It was about 5 years ago, a much younger Jonathan Green came to me and said, "Would you like to do some radio?" And I said, "What's radio?" And he said, "It's that thing in the car the music comes out of." And I said, "Oh, the horn." And he went away. But then he came back and he hit me over the head with Mark Scott's biography, and the rest is history. Life, death, renewal. So at last, some happy news. In 2017, the Guide to Modern Living has been sold to the Institute for Public Affairs, who have privatised it and turned it into an adorable lifestyle segment to be presented by Larry Emder. Here's Larry now. Thanks for joining us, Larry. Hello! We understand your new show is going to be a lot lighter than Mr. Green's show, a sort of old-style vaudeville radio program with the 18C orchestra and the free speech dancers.
Yes, that's right.
And then at 9:55, the listeners will get a real treat. They'll enjoy Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for the Australian Bill Leak's Not Even a Tiny Bit Racist Outback Adventures.
Tie me kangaroo down, sport, tie me kangaroo down.
This week's show, mate, episode 257 of our 926-part series, Bad Things Happen to Gillian Triggs. Coming up to 10 o'clock, and the news, and that's it for Sunday Extra for this week.
Okay. Excuse the coughing, but this week I'm just getting over a cold. First actual head cold I've had for a while. I think it must be because when I went looking for some Lemsip in the middle of the night, it tasted a little bit old and stale, and I had a look at the box in the morning. Last time I had a cold was a fair while ago. The box had an expiry date of 2009. But, you know, pseudoephedrine still works, even when it is out of date. Yeah, well, we're still at the situation where will the real Donald Trump please stand up? I understand he had just as much time talking to the Japanese Prime Minister, which is an astounding breach of what normal people would call ordinary international diplomatic protocol. But yeah, the Japanese Prime Minister went in with his aides carrying a golf club. Donald Trump likes golf. They talked about golf. Donald Trump kept the golf club. And neither one of them are having anything to say publicly about whether they discussed Donald Trump's plans to give Japan nuclear weapons to defend itself rather than have American soldiers stationed there. And he spent a bit of time campaigning on that, but, you know, it's in the works. Apparently Sarah Palin has been mentioned as Secretary of State for the Interior. I don't actually know quite how wide-reaching such an appointment would prove to be. My understanding is that Sarah Palin is a Bible-thumping Christian who's on a third marriage, and a couple of her teenage children are unmarried parents. So there's a bit of a credibility gap between what she says she's into and how she actually lives. And she famously said that you can see Russia from her house in Alaska. So she's a bit geographically challenged, but, you know, there is that old classic question and answer. What is the purpose of war? The answer is war exists in order to teach geography to the Americans. They don't know anything about anywhere unless they have a relative over there shooting at the locals, playing hopscotch in the minefield and calling booby traps improvised explosive devices because nobody wants to be the booby who got trapped. And if you call it improvised, then it makes the person who put it together sound somewhat more depraved and barbaric than the people who work in munitions factories like General Dynamics or Lockheed Martin, building really high-tech death machines. Grumman, perhaps. Yeah, so should be interesting. Sarah Palin for Secretary of State for the Interior. People that Donald Trump described as outright liars like Ted Cruz, he's in the running for Attorney General. It's all just, it's very, very, very weird. This whole idea that the Americans vote for a single individual to set their entire national policy who is then permitted to pick and choose among people who either can be guaranteed to be sycophantic little toady yes men, arse lickers, or people who've been nice to them once upon a time, back in the day. I mean, John fucking Kennedy, he appointed Robert McNamara as Secretary for Defence because McNamara had been able to turn the Ford Motor Company around from a tanking disaster following the Ford Edsel, which nobody wanted to buy and cost a lot of money to tool up to build. So therefore he got put in charge of the American Army, Navy and Air Force. And, you know, he came up with some really interesting ideas, you know, like he wanted the Navy and the Air Force to have the same aeroplanes because he couldn't see the point in building one aeroplane for flying off the ground and another one that had special capabilities to cope with the runway. Cost a lot of money, and the Navy never actually did ever operate an F-111 off a carrier. But that was McNamara's idea for saving money. He was also the bloke who was obsessed with bullshit body counts in Vietnam. He believed that the light at the end of Westmoreland's tunnel was something other than a train coming to run over him. And finally, eventually, you know, like when he got really, really old and he could see his own mortality breathing up his cloaca, he got up there and he admitted publicly that he'd been telling a lot of bullshit about Vietnam at the time, and he always knew it was a stupid idea. But he was a friend of the president, therefore he got appointed. We're now waiting to see who Donald Trump thinks is his friend, who might be appointed to help run America in the Trump-anonic way. Now that dumb Fuckistan, which is the new name for the middle bit of America. You know, you've got the intellectual elite, not elite. It's spelled E-L-I-T-E. It's an elite, not an elite. Unless, of course, our Prime Minister was thinking in Latin and he thought there was a missing A. So he's thinking it's an elite. But I don't think so. I think he's trying to gild the surface of fine gold or paint the perfect surface of a lily. Polishing a turd is another way of looking at it. Putting lipstick on a pig. He's attempting to appear to be more erudite than he actually is. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. Back here in Australia, our Minister for Immigration, Peter Dutton, has decided that because there are some teenagers in Melbourne who are part of the Somalian expatriate community who've been acting out, getting caught in stupid, petty criminal activity, the sort of thing that angry young men do when they're not fitting in well. Instead of accepting that, you know, this sometimes happens with teenagers, especially when they don't feel accepted by the surrounding community. They feel a sense of being sort of held at a distance, and nothing they do is any good in the eyes of the people who are judging them. So they sort of double it down and they say, okay, give a dog a bad name. You reckon I'm an arsehole? I'll show you what an arsehole I can be, kind of thing. So because white racist, xenophobic, ethnocentric, basically Nazi politics is really on an upswing in Australia and apparently in America and in Britain and France and Germany and all over the friggin' white Euro peon colonised world. Yeah, Dutton's decided that he's looking into the idea of cancelling their Australian residency permits, visas, whatever it is, and shipping them back to Somalia because, you know, like the fact that they've come here as babies when their parents were refugees and Australia's isolated them and alienated them ever since, and therefore they don't fit in now in Australia, means that, oh, well, we should just fucking wash our hands of these people that we've raised to not fit in here and send them somewhere where they've got absolutely no hope of fitting in. And, you know, Dutton figures this will play well in the One Nation camp. It'll play well in the white supremacist camp of the Liberal Party. And don't forget that the Labor Party was founded on the White Australia policy. So, yeah, things are going pretty badly all around the world. On the bright side, the Chinese general is a bit of a fire eater, says that he's looking forward to a chance to fight to defend China's interest in the South China Sea and the Spratly Islands. He actually showed up in Canberra last week and he had a private séance with the Department of Defence, and they're not talking. So I think Australia may have been told at a very direct and high level that if we don't back off on the Spratly Islands thing, not only are we going to get our ass handed to us in a sling, we'll become a Chinese colony for the next 1,000 years because they've got plans for putting Trump back in his box. It's an interesting time we live in. There's just no other way to look at it. You know, we've got the Chinese curse. We live in interesting times. So, Donald Trump is going to be your president, Yankees. I feel sorry for you. There's nothing I can do to undo it. I told you that it was going to happen. I prophesied that you were going to do it. But, you know, so did the Simpsons, apparently. So it's not that hard to be right about American politics, especially if you live far enough away. You've got the perspective lent by distance. Oh, dear, Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, leader of the free world, the man with the nuclear codes in the football. What a prospect. What a prospect. I'm almost speechless, but I'm saved by the upload limit. Warble's on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.